Good afternoon, runners. Welcome to our Wednesday show with our partners at HSS. This is a great show, guys. My name is Coach Steve with New York Road Runners, and we're here to talk all things running. We have a great segment talking about recovering from this big marathon you guys have coming up. Some of you maybe just ran Berlin last weekend. You might be doing London this weekend. You might be doing Chicago soon. You're doing New York in a few months. So a lot of marathons are happening right now. So we're going to talk about recovery from marathons, and also each show I like to kind of dig deep into one body part. And this show, we're talking about your knee. So runner's knee, kind of what it is, how to kind of heal from it, strength workout you can do for it. So if you've had any injuries, this might be the show for you. I hope you don't have any injuries, but runners, we do have some every now and then. So I would like to know, runners, if you're watching this, where you're watching from. So if you're watching from New York City, in the country, in the world, let us know where you're watching from. And also any training questions you have. Like I said, injuries, this is the show to talk about that. But also, if you have race questions coming up, maybe during the TCS New York City Marathon 18-mile training series this weekend, we got a NYRR Staten Island half coming up. Race questions, training questions, put those in the chats, and we're going to answer those throughout the show. But I definitely want to introduce our amazing guest here, Michelle from HSS. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about this.
Michelle, we have a lot of runners, like I said, who are in the high mileage of marathon training. We're about, a few weeks out from New York City Marathon. They're not tapering quite yet. And so kind of what is as we dive deep in our show here, biggest advice for runners kind of in those high mileage weeks training for ideally our marathon, which is, 5-6 weeks away?
Yeah, I think, this is a prime time for a lot of runners. And as you said, they're getting into that high mileage part of their training. And I think it's really important to kind of remember when you're not on that high mileage run, that recovery in between and making sure you're taking care of your body between those long runs. That way you can make it through to Marathon Sunday.
So as we talked about, we're training for the marathon. Some people ran 20 weeks, 12 weeks, 10 weeks, you name it. They're out there getting the miles in. But what a lot of training plans don't talk about is what happens after you finish 26.2. A lot of training plans go out the window, but I like to say recovery is where you get the most. Recovery starts as you cross that finish line and how you get stronger for your next race. I really want to talk about recovering from these marathons. Like I said, Berlin just happened, London's coming up, Chicago, New York City. So as runners cross that finish line, let's just say New York City, in Central Park, what do? We finish our race, we get our medal. What is number one thing for recovery after we cross that finish line?
So what I always tell my patients who are running the marathon is once you cross the finish line, don't stop. Don't stop as soon as you cross the line. Keep moving. It's a long way out of Central Park, and recovery starts that second you cross the line. Keep moving through the park so your legs don't stiffen up on you. You've got to remember you still have to get home before you even start, your at-home recovery process. But keep moving once you cross the line. Try to keep your body as warm as you can. Try to make it home first without stiffening up. And that's when recovery really starts after that, right? Typically, that same day, a nice hot bath, if you want to use some Epsom salt, that can be helpful. And if you can get yourself into some type of like a compression boot, like a Normatec or something like that, that can be really helpful for the legs too, before you start that kind of next phase of recovery, a day or so after the race. But immediately I would say, keep your body moving. Don't let your legs tighten up on you. Don't stop. Try to keep the blood flowing through your legs until you make it home.
Michelle, every single year I've worked at New York City or NYRR for about 8 years, coming up my 7th marathon. I took a year off there, and then 6th marathon with COVID shutdown and stuff. And every year I'm at the finish line and we see runners crossing the finish line, and a lot of them want to sit down. And when they do sit down, usually they're not, and they might not be injured because of injured, obviously medical staff's there, but they just want to sit down. They sit on the curb, whatever it is. And it is the hardest thing to grab their arm and pull them up. Can you talk about what's going in the body when we sit down? Why is that so bad for runners to do after 26.2 miles?
Yeah, you've got to remember what you just put your body through, right? It's a major feat to run a marathon. So when you stop and sit down, all the blood is going to pool, and then it's very hard to get back up, right? You start to get very dizzy, everything kind of shuts down on you. The body thinks that like you've completed the task and you're done. It's not going to move, but you still need to get yourself out of Central Park and then home, wherever you're coming from, whether that's back on a plane, whether that's a subway back to wherever you live. So yes, please, people are there telling you not to sit, not because they don't want you to get a break, but they're trying to help you. Do not sit down, keep moving, walk, get yourself warm. If you have a heat shield, throw it on. Keep your body as warm as you can, because once you stop moving, your whole system is just going to kind of like stop. You need to keep the blood flowing. That way your tissues stay warm and they don't hurt as much. So yes, please do not sit down after you cross that finish line. Keep walking till you get out of Central Park and get home.
Pull up so much weight after a while at the finish line. Look for me at the finish line, guys. I'll give you a high five and a hug if you want it, but I don't want to pull you up from sitting down. Locals, you mentioned locals going back home, or even, from out of towners, we're going to be, a lot of them will be taking the subway after the race, unless obviously within a few block radius. When we get on the subway, it's a few minutes later, maybe 30, 40 minutes later. Advise those runners to stand up on the subway instead of sitting down. I mean, I know we're kind of getting nitty gritty here, but I think runners, they're going to look for a seat on the subway. It's been maybe 30 minutes, 40 minutes. What do you advise for those runners?
It's funny because I just remember myself after running the marathon and I sat down, but it's really hard to get back up. Everything's going to just get really stiff on you. So if you can stay standing up, great. If you need to sit down, that's totally fine. But I would say try to keep your body moving in some way, whether it's sitting, doing ankle pumps, or standing, doing calf raises, or if you're just kind of moving your knees around, like try to just keep your body as mobile as possible in the couple hours after the race to try to limit as much stiffness as you can. Specifically, most people feel it in their knees, sometimes the hips too. But the more mobile you can be, the better off. So even if you sit, just try to like extend your knee open back and forth a little bit. Try to keep yourself moving on the subway the best you can. But if you need to sit at that point, it's fine. You're going to stiffen up. That's a normal, response to running 26 miles. But I would say try to just keep your body moving, whether it's, sitting calf raises, standing calf raises, or like a knee extension sitting down, just to keep blood flowing.
I love that advice. Really good. So we're, let's continue this journey of our runners finishing the race. We finished across the finish line. We got our medal, which we love. We're taking our photos. We got a recover bag from HSS, which has tons of goodies in it that runners should take, I'm assuming, immediately or as soon as we can start digesting foods and liquids. We're on a subway. We're standing. What are the days after the marathon? Thinking about, we're Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. What does our recovery plan look like for those kind of 2 to 3 days after the marathon?
Yeah, I think that's when your recovery really starts. You've kind of, the soreness has started to subside a little bit and you're feeling a little bit better. So I think, as soon as you can get yourself moving again, I think it behooves you. So typically I'll have runners do like a shakeout run after, just an easy mile or two, again, to get that blood flowing back to your legs. If you feel too sore to do that, riding a stationary bike is a really great way to get blood to the legs. Also, swimming is fantastic. So something that's, a light workout that just gets your legs moving again. That way, again, you're not feeding into that stiffness. You're loosening everything up. Typically in the days after the race is what people should be doing. If you have access to compression boots, like I said before, it's a great thing to use to help your recovery as well. Some elevation if you have any swelling in your feet afterwards. So basically kind of self-care. You want to make sure that you're loosening those legs up. So I would say a shakeout run, stationary bike, swimming are all great things to do after the race.
I love that so much. Really good advice for runners. Talk about nutrition. How does that play into recovery? I know we always tell runners eat. More proteins. What do you have for those runners maybe looking, how do we eat after the marathon?
I would say nutrition, I would keep everything the same. I wouldn't like throw a wrench in it. Obviously right after the race, you're packing calories in. So I would say treat yourself and eat whatever you want. I think the biggest thing is hydration. You really want to make sure that you're rehydrating your body, because most people, the best we can do to stay hydrated on the race, it's still probably not going to happen. So make sure that you're drinking, getting some electrolytes in, and bouncing back as far as that recovery and hydration. And nutrition, I would just try to keep it simple. Your body has just done a major feat. So I'd be careful with what you put in. It might upset your stomach depending on how you are as a runner. And you'll probably know that after going through your training process of what feels good after a long run and what doesn't feel good on your stomach after a long run. So listen to that and apply that at the end of your marathon. That way you're not upsetting yourself by eating something that's, maybe overly aggressive and greasy, even though you feel like you really want that. But I would keep it clean, but I would really focus on your hydration and make sure that you're getting that back to baseline.
I love it. So we can go out for a family dinner the night of the marathon in New York City and have some good meals, keep it healthy. But what should we be looking for in those dinners in staying the night in New York City? What should we be looking for that recovery meal?
Yeah, I would say protein is always a great thing to have, right? So protein, I would make sure that whatever you're eating is like reasonable on the grease side, because that's probably not going to feel great on the stomach after having run that much, even though I think a lot of people crave that. So again, I would just be careful, but if your body is used to that after long runs, you're probably safe. But definitely some type of protein, and you're going to need carbs, right? You just ran a huge race. So I would say try to keep a balanced meal, but definitely protein and carbs get in there and hydration. I think a lot of people probably skimp on the hydration part when they shouldn't after the race.
That's great advice. Runners, I see a lot of shout outs, a lot of questions in here. We have a few more questions for you, Michelle, before we jump into those questions. But guys, if you're just joining us, please let me know where you're watching from. Love to hear from you. And also any questions you have, put them in the comments. We're going to answer those soon. I see questions from all you runners out there. Denise, I see you. We have Cheng, I see you, but we're going to come to that in a second. Now, when do we think about training again, Michelle? We just finished the race. It's maybe November 8th. How do we start the process of training again? What does that look like for runners maybe they want to do another marathon?
Yeah, I think it definitely depends on what your training schedule is and your training expertise. So if you're an elite runner and you're running, another race that's coming up soon, you need to get back into training, sooner than somebody who's running a race in, a few months from now. In the ideal world, I would say, a 2-week break to kind of get yourself back to baseline, recover, get those shakeout runs in, and get yourself, ready to start back into your next training block, I think is a reasonable time frame. And I think by that time, most people are feeling good again, right? Typically for the first week after a marathon, you're feeling like you ran a marathon. So respect that, give yourself time to get back to baseline as far as what you feel in your legs and your whole body. And then you can start to wean back into a training program there. If you're a less experienced runner, I'd give yourself more time. If this is your first marathon, I'd maybe throw a few extra weeks in there before you start, back at your training block. But if you're a fairly experienced runner and you've done this a few times, I would say a couple weeks is sufficient.
I love that. Guys, let's go to your runner questions and shout outs. All right, coming in from New York, we have Cleva. We also have Calabri from New York. Also, we have Otto from Beacon, New York. A lot of New York, from upstate New York's in the house, which is great to see. We have Denise from New Jersey. I'm in New Jersey. Well, normally New Jersey, but thank you for writing from Dumont, New Jersey. We have Dub from Alamo City. We have Mary Ellen from South Philly in the house. We have Jassy from Club Rise to Run. Jassy, it's always great to see you on our chats and when I do see you in person. Thanks for joining. Robin from Michigan. We have Wally from Lower Manhattan and Joe from my hometown, Chicago, Illinois. Thank you all for writing it and joining the chat. I want to jump over to the questions. A lot of these are for you, Michelle, but I'm going to take the first one. We have Chang writing a great question saying, put that on the screen there. AJ says, how many runners are running in this year's, I'm assuming, marathon? Chang, great question. This year, we are back. NYRR is back to full-scale events. So as you may have known, last year we were kind of cut that capacity in half, about 25,000. But this year, we are back to about 50,000 runners finishing the TCS New York City Marathon, which is really, really exciting. So a lot of runners out there, a lot of great stories as well. If you're looking for some inspirational stories, check out our website. Our blog has some great stories for you guys to stay inspired on these last few weeks of training. But great question, Chang. And Chang, are you one of the 50,000 people? I hope you are, and I hope to see you at the finish line, not picking you up off the ground, but giving you a high five as you finish. Let's go to the next one. What do you have coming in next? We have, with a nasty blister in the Achilles tendon, would you run a marathon in 3 days' time? Ooh, maybe they're in London. What do you think about this one, Michelle?
Ooh, that's going to be up to how you feel, really. If you've got a blister, it's going to be what you're able to kind of tolerate. That's a tough one. That's going to be how you feel.
Yeah, the tricky one for sure. I think judge that how you feel. And always remember, we're here to help you run for your rest of your life. I don't want you to get sidetracked, depending on, this thing might sidetrack your next year's running if it gets really bad. Michelle, what are the side effects of a blister? Is there infections it could have? What's kind of the biggest side effects we can look for in this runner? Worst case scenario, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, typically, so first off, don't pop your blisters. Leave them alone. If a blister does pop, it could, get infected underneath if you have dirt that's getting in that area. So try to keep everything clean. Sorry guys, I have COVID, so my voice is like a little off. Try to keep everything super clean, but please do not pop your blisters. Leave them there. Most blisters don't get infected. I would just throw a Band-Aid over it, but it's going to be, how you feel. Unfortunately, the rubbing of your shoe is what's causing that, or your sock. So I would just look to find the reason for the blister. That way you can prevent it from happening in the future. If it's really, really bad, you should definitely have someone look at it, like if there's blood underneath. But typically, a regular blister from just shear forces on your sock and your shoe while you're running will heal over time on its own, but leave it alone.
It's a really good question. Yeah, really good answer. I always feel I need to pop a blister, but I always hear from you guys, don't do it. So I don't pop them, but I always want to. We have next question coming in here. I think it's from Denise. Let's see if it comes up. Right, there we go. At this stage of training, how long is too long to take a break from high impact workouts, including running? I'm trying to rest what I believe is a minor injuries. I've done several 16 to 20 mile runs already. I'm assuming that's long runs already. What would you recommend for this runner?
How long is too long to take a break? I mean, listen, if you're not hitting your long runs, it's going to be tough marathon day. So it's hard to say this question. This is a good question. I would consult with like your running coach or, somebody on your team that's been helping you along the way with this one, because this is kind of an individualized question. If you're having trouble hitting your long runs and you find that you're getting a little bit nervous about the race, that's where you start to run into an issue of ending up with an injury, on marathon day. So, missing a run every now and then is not the end of the world. But if you're missing multiple long runs, that's when we start to get worried that you haven't built the capacity that you'll need to complete the marathon on Sunday. So, I would say if you're getting up into, the high teens to 20, you'll probably be okay. But if you're missing those kind of end of training runs, that's where I would start to worry. But there's not like a set time of like when it's too much. It's very individual to you. It also depends on your running experience. If you've done a couple marathons before, you can probably get away with it a little bit more because your foundational capacity is probably a little bit higher than someone who's never run a marathon before. So it depends.
I know this is one of the questions. I think it does depend. From a coaching perspective, Denise, I would definitely, from my side, I want all runners to be at the start line healthy. That is the number one goal for me. So if that means missing runs, if that means taking a step back, if that means switching, as Michelle said earlier, swimming or cycling, to if those don't hurt, do those as opposed to running. Because if you can maybe cycle for 3 hours and that doesn't hurt you, that's still going to help you. Obviously, it doesn't exactly mimic running, but it will help your heart rate get up and some endurance out of it. And you can do that. But it does depend on your background. I agree with you on this one. We have one more coming up, and then I'll jump back into talking about runner's knee. Our last one for right now is popped up there. Volcano 0201. I started doing backwards jogging where my calf and upper leg be feeling the exercises. Do you believe it is good for runners to do now? Does backwards kind of jogging, running have any benefits in the calf or upper leg?
So this is an interesting question. So backwards jogging and backwards walking is something we actually use in rehab a lot for people who have either Achilles issues or quad weakness. So it's something we use as an easy way to activate both of those things. And it's a little less force through the Achilles tendon, and you're able to kind of push off your quad a little bit more. So we use it actually in early phases of rehab for things. There's nothing wrong with doing backwards jogging as far as like a neuromuscular piece. I don't think backwards jogging is going to help your forwards jogging as far as performance. But we definitely utilize it for people who are dealing with injuries. But I wouldn't say like everybody go out and run backwards now. But it's not a bad thing. I'd be curious to see what your take is on that, Steve.
Yeah, as long as you're being safe out there, I don't have the best balance, so I might fall over backwards jogging. But if you're feeling strength and something, it's good to change up the routine. Also, I think as runners, we're always just forward motion. I've heard from a lot of physical therapists like yourself. It's good to do other, directions, which I think could help you as well. We don't really prescribe backwards running in any of our training programs, but if you're working with a physical therapist, doctor, or you find benefit in them, go for it. We have some more questions, but I do want to jump back into our run show here, guys. As I said before, any questions you have, put those in the chats. We're taking them one by one throughout the show, and let me know where you're watching from. I do want to get in and talk about the knee of the athlete. We call it the runner's knee, because it is an important part to the whole kinetic chain of bodies, and we want to keep them healthy. So Michelle, talk to us about keeping our knees strong and pain-free while running. How do we do that? The best ways to do that. And you can kind of expand on that a little bit.
Sure. So this is a super common injury, the knee in general with runners, especially around this time of year with the marathon. I think the best thing you can do for your knee is strength training, which I know a lot of people don't love to hear. But truly strength training is the best thing you can do to prevent or to reduce injury, but also to improve the performance of your running. Like a lot of people, I don't think fully understand how much improvement you can have in your running performance if you add strength training to your program, but it will also help keep your knees and your hips healthy. So I think a strength training program, as well as focused on your knees, as well as your hips. So your hip is a big driver of what your knee does. So if your hips are super strong, that's going to help your knees move a little bit better. And if your knee is super strong, that's going to help you feel better when you run and also reduce injury risk.
That's awesome. A lot of runners, we've heard kind of a myth, maybe let's call it. I hear from people, runners have, as you age, you get bad knees as you age as a runner. It kind of hurts your knees in the long run. Can you talk about that? Is that true? Is that false? Is that a myth? Kind of how does running strengthen or hurt your knees as you age?
So I would say this is definitely a myth. So there's actually been studies that have been done that look at a variety of distance runners and their knees and looking at arthritis, through the years. So with the exception of ultramarathoners, because they do have a higher incidence of developing arthritis, marathoners and under, actually it doesn't. So I think that's a myth. I think naturally people are going to develop arthritis in their knees. And then if they happen to be runners, we're going to blame it on that. But that's not necessarily the cause. Those people probably would have had arthritis regardless of if they were runners or not. I do think, if you're not strong, that can cause, increased stress on certain areas. And maybe you're developing arthritis more on one side of the knee or not, depending on your mechanics. So again, I would say strength training is probably the best thing you can do to supplement your running program to prevent your knee from getting that. But I wouldn't say that because you're a runner means that you're going to have bad knees.
You hear that, Mom? I can run and my knees will be okay. That's all I'll say to her. I love it. That's really good information for runners to know. So as I said, there's a thing called runner's knee out there. We have our own injury based off our own athletic, what we do to stay healthy out of runner's knee. Can you talk about kind of what runner's knee is, how it affects us as runners, as opposed to maybe swimmers or other maybe basketball players, and kind of just how it affects our long-term and how we recover from what's called runner's knee?
Sure. So runner's knee is an umbrella term for knee pain in a runner. So typically it happens because there's a lot of compression over the knee because the quad is not super strong. So that's the easiest way to kind of explain that. Again, the best way to avoid runner's knee is to keep your hips really strong. That will help your quad fire the way it's supposed to, and it will help your kneecap track properly in the joint to prevent you from getting that pain and overload on the front side of the knee. So again, the best thing you can do is keep your hips and your knee strong and make sure you're working that strengthening program into your training program. But also think ahead. If you have another training block coming up in a couple months, spend the next couple months getting really strong with your knees. That way you don't have to worry about it as much for your next training program. So you want to make sure you have good foundational strength, but that you're carrying that through during your running program. The biggest thing I have runners complain of is they say they don't have time to strength train because they're so worried about getting their runs in. But really, you should be at a point where you're really strong, and the strength training is pretty easy to fit in a couple days a week. So it shouldn't be that big of a deal So if you don't feel like you're there, that means that you probably need a better foundational base of your strength first. But runner's knee is just, a generalized knee pain that usually is over the front side of the knee, typically the patellar tendon. And it's usually from lack of quad strength. And it can be a little bit from your mechanics too. So it always helps to have someone just look at your running form also.
When you say strength train, is this something that's long and hard in the gym where we're doing a lot of deadlifts and squats, or can we do these things at home with body weight such as lunges or squats without weights? You kind of talk about, and how often should we be doing them to stay strong throughout our running?
So it depends on where you are in your training program. So for example, if you are looking ahead to your next training block and you have time, I would say that's when you're going to have those hard workouts at the gym. You're really building that strength and the muscular gains during that kind of like off season in between your training blocks. When you're in season, so when you're in a training program, it's going to switch a little bit. And it's going to be a little bit of that neuromuscular strength training. So you can do more body weight stuff at home. You can still lift weights. I think people are really afraid to lift weights because they don't want to be sore for their run. But if you have someone develop a program properly, you should be able to space it so that you can do your heavy lifts on certain days of the week that won't affect your long runs. But I would say the bulk of like your heavy strength training is going to be preseason to running. So in between your training blocks. And then we taper down when you're in season during marathon training. The same way we would do with an athlete, like a football player, they're going to lift heavy before the season starts, and then we're going to shift that training when they enter the season. So it's the same concept for runners with their running training program versus their strength training program.
I love that. All right, runners, let's go back to questions and shout outs. All right. We have a few runners here. I want to give Michelle a break because she's been talking a lot and I can see the hoarse voice coming. We have, I'm going to mispronounce your name. I super apologize for it, but I'm going to try my best here. Evela Gia from Finland. Thank you. That's the farthest we've had so far. Thank you for writing and joining today. We have Diego from Buenos Aires. We have Tatiana from District of Columbia, DC. We have Peter writing from Long Island. And we have Sian from the UK, also very far from us. Thank you guys so much for writing in and joining our chat today, especially those out of country. Maybe you guys are training for the HSS New York City Marathon. So I hope to see you guys in November at the Expo or maybe on race day. So we have some great questions coming here. AJ, let's pop the first one up. I believe it's from Wally. What do we have? All right, Wally, when should the last training race run be before November 6th? So I'll kind of take the first stab at this from a coaching aspect. And Michelle, anything you want to add, please add on. Wally, really good question. And this, once again, will depend on the athlete. So for most athletes out there, your last long run is about 3 weeks out from your goal race. From in this example, New York City Marathon training. So 3 weeks out is your last long run, and usually it is your longest. Now, that does not mean you're stopping after that. That means you're just kind of decreasing your mileage after that. So the following week, let's just say you went to 20 miles on the 3 weeks out. Next week might be 12 miles after that, and then you might go down to 7 or something like that, maybe a week before. Now, some athletes will do 4 weeks out from taper, before they start tapering, and some might do 2 weeks out from taper. Now, I find that experienced athletes that have done marathons before and also younger athletes might do 2 weeks out. And then the opposite spectrum, sometimes older athletes, or if you're very injury prone or you maybe have an injury trying to recover from 4 weeks out, can work for you as well. But keep in mind, after tapering, we're not stopping training. We're not stopped running. We're just giving those 3 weeks-ish of our time for a body to recover fully so we can get the start line as healthy as possible. Michelle, anything you want to kind of add to the training run last time?
Yeah, I would say, I love that answer. I think that's perfect. I think just remember, when you run a long run, your body needs time to take that and adapt to it to get the benefits from running it. So don't think that running a long run a couple of days before the marathon is going to all of a sudden make you, make those miles count. Your body needs time to adapt to it and then to get, better off of that and build that capacity. So that's why there's a taper in between, and there's no need to run a super long run, the week before the race. At that point, your body has taken all it needs to take from the training run. And that's when it's, tapering 2, 3, 4 weeks before. For some people that may sound crazy, but that's spot on. That's where your body has peaked at its training. And now it's a taper down and get ready for the race. It doesn't mean you stopped running. It just means that your high mileage stuff is done at that point, and you're starting to go into those kind of like mid and low mileage to prep for race day. So I think that's perfect.
I love that. I did hear, correct me if I'm wrong, a study that it takes about 2 weeks to use a training you decided to work out today. I'm going to be able to use that endurance or speed within 2 weeks. It kind of takes 2 weeks for the body to adapt to the new workout you did. So if you did that, last long run about 2 to 3 weeks out, you'll be able to use that for the marathon. But a long run a week out or speed workout a few days before, while it might shake out your legs, you can't use that training for the marathon. It's more you have a more chance of injuring yourself than helping your marathon.
Yeah, that's exactly right. 2 weeks is that magic number. And that's why a lot of training programs alternate between a long run 1 week and a mid run the week after. And then you go back to your long run. That puts you at like a 2 week block between your last one. So yes, the 2 week is like the magic, general number. So just remember that when you're training, if it all makes sense when you understand why you're doing what you're doing. But yes, that's spot on.
Love it. Let's see what next, AJ. What do we got on the screen here? We have Clevla saying, how many miles should be run throughout the week to prepare for the 26.2? I'll be in Central Park for the 18 miles on Sunday. So from a coaching aspect, I want you to follow your training plan. There's no number for anyone out there. Like we said, some runners might do, some runners are doing 50 miles a week. Some do 70 miles a week. Some do 30 miles a week. Some professional athletes do over 100 miles per week. And it just depends on, how experienced you are, where you started. Also matters where you started at. So if you started at 30 miles a week, you'll gradually build up to maybe like a 50 miles a week. But if you started at 10 miles a week, you're not going to get that high. So it's really going to depend on where you started from and your experience level. And that's also going to affect how your long runs are. Some runners might get to 22 miles long run. Some might get to 18 miles as the last long run. There is no magic number or magic amount of long runs you need to complete the plan. I just advise you following your training plan, scale back if you need to, work with a coach or a physical therapist like Michelle if you're feeling any injuries. But there's no certain mileage to get through the marathon. Any thoughts on that, Michelle?
Yeah, I think that's perfect. I think what I recommend most to people is to work with a running coach to develop a program that's specific to you. So there is no magic number. There's no magic training program that's going to get you to the finish line better than someone else's. It's the program that's built for you. So I think sometimes taking generic programs and going off of that, is a great way to start. But having someone who has experience and can kind of assess where you currently are as a runner, like you said, versus where you're trying to get. And then they build a program that fills those gaps specific to you, which might be different than the program for, your next door neighbor. And that's totally fine. I think the more individualized you can make something, the better chance you have of getting there with, as healthy as possible.
All right. What do we have coming? The next question from a runner. We have Diego. Great question. What about nutrition, hydration during the race? So I'll take from a coaching standpoint for this one, once again, do what you did in training. Look at your training. How often did you drink? How often did you eat anything? What did you eat? What did you drink? On the marathon course, we're going to have water and Gatorade almost every single mile between 3 and 25 with the exceptions of 5, 7, and 9. And then we will have our jets, which are science and sports. They'll be at 12 and 18, and then bananas along the course at 20 mile, 21 and 24. Now, with that said, if you have not used science and sports, you still have a few weeks to practice it and try it in your training. But if they don't sit well with you, bring your own. Like I said, Gatorade, it's endurance formula, lemon lime. You can have that on the course every mile minus what I mentioned before is a both sides course. Use that. I tell runners to drink and eat by time, not by distance or by mileage, just because your first 5 miles, it might be quicker than your last 5 miles. You might be tired. Ideally not, but it happens. So, every 45 minutes, you're going to take a gel, or every, 5 minutes, you're going to have water. Whatever your system you've done in training is what you want to mimic on race day, and try your best to resort from changing that, because that's what you're training for, not just your body, but you're training your nutrition and your hydration to see what works best for you. Michelle, any other comments?
No, I mean, that's the biggest thing with anything you guys are doing. If you train for it, do it that way. Do not change what you did on race day, because it usually doesn't work out. So same thing like shoes, clothing, anything. What you're training for is what you should prep for on race day. So try to do your long runs in the clothes you're going to run in. Try to do, your nutrition, the way you're going to do it on the course. So, like Steve said, if those are things that you want to take on the course, take them during your training runs. If they don't work for you, then you got to bring your own and plan ahead. But I would not try something new on race day, especially with nutrition, hydration, because it usually doesn't work out for you. So try to prep, look at the map, see where you think you're going to take and where you're not going to take, and plan ahead and use that to prep for your training runs and make sure you're taking the same hydration and nutrition that you will on race day.
And just keep in mind, if you're training with a hydration pack, there's like Camelback is a big brand. Anything over the shoulders is not allowed in the marathon. So if you're training with that, I advise kind of trying something new for the next few weeks. We do allow waste packs, wastewater packs. So those are the ones you kind of store gels or anything in it with water or Gatorade on them. But anything over the shoulders is not allowed per NYPD guidance. If you want to see a full list of what is allowed, not allowed, you can check out our race page and prohibited items. You can take a look at that. But that's one thing runners sometimes miss, that they want to bring Camelback or over the shoulder bags with water, and those are just not allowed. All right, next question. What do we have? Michael says, my second toe started hurting and transitioned to indoor cycling for the time being. How long do you think the recovery period could possibly be? I'm gonna let you take this one.
It depends. I mean, without seeing it, you really have to have someone assess why your second toe is hurting. Second toe usually means that something with your kind of like your push off is happening that's causing you to put more pressure on your second toe, giving you pain. So I would definitely, you've got a little bit of time before race day. So I would have someone take a look at it so you can see what's going on and make the change. I wouldn't just expect it to go away on its own. So I would say, utilize the time you have now between race day to kind of figure out what's going on. That way you can adjust, and be ready for Marathon Sunday.
There's so many questions. I love it. Let's see what the next one is. All right, we have Peter coming in. What's your take on carb loading? I've heard that if a high carb diet is not typical for you, the increase in carbs leading up to the race can cause issues. So Peter, really good question. And I'm going to use a phrase that Michelle was saying earlier is it depends. This is going to depend on your long runs. This is going to depend on what you're training with. So, and you're practicing also now your race day fuel or your pre-race day fuel on your long runs. So I want you to write down in your training log what you are eating, what you are drinking, what you are wearing, and your mileage and your time splits, all that fun stuff. Also write all those details down, because come race day, I want you to copy what went well and not do what went wrong. So you're going to wear that shirt, fit great on you. That's an option you can wear for the marathon. Or that jacket chafed on you. Well, if it rains, don't wear that jacket. Also, once again, you ate pasta the night before and that sat well with you, or that bean burrito didn't sit well with you. The idea of carb loading, from my knowledge, and Michelle, please correct me if I'm wrong, is what people think carb loading is you're going to go out the night before the marathon on Saturday and go to the Italian diner here and just eat 5 servings of pasta. But a lot of people wake up with a lot of GI issues, as you mentioned before, as you mentioned in the question. What I'd like to see you do is about 3 days before the race, gradually start increasing your carbs throughout the day. So for dinner that, Thursday night, have a little more carbs in your meal. And then on Friday, lunch and dinner have more carbs. Keep maybe your breakfast the same, but have carbs. And then Saturday, breakfast, lunch, dinner, some more carbs. And then in the morning of the race, still some carbs, maybe top it off with like a gel or something like that, or goo or a wafer or whatever you need, and some Gatorade. Obviously focus on hydration always. So you're not increasing your carbs dramatically. Just over the course of 3 days, you're kind of topping off your tank, as you call it, especially that race morning, that will hopefully, these are foods that you're used to eating, will hopefully not give you GI issues on race morning. Michelle, what is your take on carb loading?
Yeah, I think, like you said, I think a lot of people envision carb loading in their head as an Italian pasta meal the night before. And I would say that's probably not recommended, like you say. I think a gradual increase in carbs is perfect. And again, whatever you're doing for your long runs for training is pretty much what you should be doing the days leading up to the marathon. So if you've already noticed that certain things feel better before your long runs, that's what you're going to stick with. So start to think about that as you get your last couple of runs in and make that your prep for race day. In general, slightly more carbs before the race is perfect, but that doesn't mean, shoveling pasta for a couple meals the days before. Lots of things can add carbs to your meal that are easy and still fairly light. So I agree with you. I think a gradual ramp up of slightly more carbs the days before is great. But the night before, I wouldn't go wild with, a massive pasta dinner. I would do what's been working for you as far as, the day before your regular long runs.
All right. Next question we have coming up. Cian, have any tips on running negative splits in the New York City Marathon? Are there any bridges or inclines in the second half to prepare for mentally? I understand the incline on mile 23 is noticeable. Really good question. I love this. So in New York City Marathon, it's not as hilly as many people think it is. So when you go to the expo, pick up a bib, we will be doing a full session every hour on the hour in the running lab, which is the back corner of the expo. You will not miss us. I promise you. We have pacers, we have pace bands. We'll be doing a course breakdown every mile on the mile. But to quickly answer your question, you can run negative splits. Pros do it every single year. Many top athletes do it. It's just a lot of runners. What happens is the cannon goes off. You have a cannon to start the marathon, which is the coolest thing ever. And Frank Sinatra plays. You go over the Verrazano Bridge and everyone says, wow, that was my fastest mile in the world. That was my fastest 5K, because you're so excited. You've been tapering for a year, for weeks and weeks. You follow the nutrition plan that we just gave you. So you're topped off with your carbs. You've had a lot of liquids in you. You went to the bathroom for it. So you're like a rat in a cage ready to go. So you sprint out of that gate and then you get to mile 16, Queensboro Bridge, or you get to mile 18. And because you went out so fast, you start slowing down. So you end up with positive split. What you want to do is those first 20 miles or 16, whatever your game plan looks like, is pedestrian pace. It's your long run pace. I always tell runners, marathon pace is not hard. It's just hard to do for 26.2 miles. We should all be able to run marathon pace for most of a marathon, but we always start at the faster end of a marathon pace. And by that, I mean your marathon pace. If you want a 4-hour marathon, your average time should be 9:09 per mile. But you're not running 9:09 every single mile. You're running maybe 9:30s for the first part, and then 9:20s, and maybe going up to 9:25 going off the Queensboro Bridge, but then 9:09 or maybe 9:05 in the Bronx. So you're kind of playing with that time, and so your range is a little bit bigger maybe than just a specific number. So you have about 3 big climbs on the marathon course. You have Verrazano Bridge, the biggest climb. You won't notice it. I promise it. You're too excited. You're not going to notice the biggest climb, but it is the biggest climb. You have Queensboro Bridge. It is a big climb, not as big as the Verrazano Bridge, but it is hard because it's mile 16. It is also quiet, eerily quiet. All you hear is a pitter patter of the runners behind you and in front of you. And then it's followed up also by the wall of noise on Fifth Avenue, which is the best part of the race. But it is a hard climb. But if you're taking it slow up that hill, going up it nice and casual, you'll be fine. And as you mentioned, the third climb is mile 23 on Fifth Avenue. It's not a bridge, so you don't expect it to be a climb. You just are running casually. First year I ran it, I didn't know about that hill. I didn't look at the elevation, and my motivation just kind of dropped because I was like, I can't complete this race. I'm hitting what's called the wall. But treat it as a bridge like you did before. Take it nice slow. Know it's coming casually. Slow your pace down, but keep the same effort level. And so there's not really a trick. Just watch your pacing early on. Stay in tune with your hydration and nutrition, because with hydration and nutrition, it's hard to catch up if you fall behind on that. You can't really fill that gas tank up any faster. So try to think of it as like a gas tank, and every now and then, the gas there's a hole in it and it's coming out. And you want to kind of just keep filling it up. If it gets empty, it's really hard to fill it up as the car is moving. So you have to stop the car to fill it up. Try to always keep it full on the course, and hopefully that'll keep you from hitting any walls or pushing that wall back. That's my 45-second course strategy for you. Let's do the next question we have here, AJ. Great questions you have. Otto, it seems that the source of most problems for runners start with weak glutes. Can you talk about kind of that a little bit? Weak glutes, how do we strengthen our glutes for runners? And if you do find that as most problems.
Yeah, I think, and you mentioned this before, Steve, was a lot of runners, we go front to back, right? You like to run. So there's not a lot of side-to-side training, and there's not a lot of strength training. So yes, weak glutes are very common in runners. Weak abductors, so the sides of your hip are usually very weak. Front to back testing of runners is usually pretty strong. But I think that side-to-side strength and that glute strength is usually lacking. So, things like single leg bridges, single leg squats, pretty much anything where you're standing on one leg, you're going to get your glute activating as a stabilizer. So a single leg exercise is like your best bang for your buck if you're able to control that. If you don't have the foundational strength, then we would start with bilateral squats, bilateral bridges, meaning both feet on the ground, things like that. But if you're strong enough to do single leg strengthening, that would be the best bang for your buck as far as glute strengthening. Things like monster walks, which I'm sure everybody knows about, clamshells, side planks, those are all great exercises to get your hips going and keep them strong. And then I'll usually have my runners pick 1 or 2 glute exercises to use as like a warm up before they go out for the run. And I'll have them just do small sets of it, maybe 3 sets of 5 or 8, just to kind of get neuromuscular activation before a runner goes out for their run. And that becomes part of their warm up routine before they head out for their training runs.
All right, that's awesome. Let's jump to the next one. Jassy, I believe Jassy from Club Rise to Run. What is one workout which can increase strength and stamina together, but no impact on joints? Is there a workout that does that?
I would say swimming's probably the closest thing to answer that question. You know, I wouldn't necessarily say swimming is traditional strengthening, but I think stamina, endurance, and cardiovascular without putting impact on the joints. Really, strength training requires impact as far as like weight bearing for most things, as far as like the legs. You can do some open chain strengthening for your legs, but I wouldn't say that like is hitting both of the things that Jassy is asking. But I would say swimming in general is a really good stamina-based cross training that's low impact. But most strength training is going to have some impact on the joints. It doesn't mean you can't do it. You just need to do it, you know, with some guidance, maybe if you're unsure of what to do.
I love that. Good question, Jassy. You almost stumped her, I think, but not quite. Let's jump to the next question. I think it's from Alexandria. I'm nursing a light lower back injury that's mostly healed, but not totally. I've not been running any hills for 3 weeks because downhill alienates my back. How should I work them back in? When will I still condition myself enough for the hills before NYC? So first I'll answer just my section of this. There's, like I said before, not many hills for New York City Marathon. Many runners do a lot of hill training. While it is important, it is not, while it's recommended, it's not mandatory to complete the race. There are runners that live where there are no hills, and whether they do sometimes treadmills or parking lots, they don't do many hills like maybe here in the East Coast, New York City. So you don't need the hills. It does help. You need to obviously take most of this as far as the lower back injury, kind of when to start running with that.
Yeah. I mean, I think, again, unfortunately, this depends. I would say taking a couple weeks off from the hills is fine, but you do want to test it and see if you're going to be able to kind of perform on race day. So I would try like some light runs and see how it feels. But again, I don't think that you need a ton of hill training to get through New York. So I would test it out and see how it feels. And if it's still not feeling great, then I would consult with someone, because that means that there's probably something else going on that's going to take a little bit more time. But, I think you have a little bit of time before race day, but I would test it out and see how you feel and then make a judgment based off that, if you need to see someone specifically for your back or not.
Awesome. Jump to the next one. I think we're almost out of questions. Any questions you guys have, please put those in the comment box. We'll grab those and answer them. Coming up next, we have Tatiana. Can you confirm 3 weeks out from the TCS New York City Marathon would be October 16th for the last weekend long run? I think that's the date. I haven't really looked at the calendar. That's probably, but just kind of count backwards. And as I said before, that's just kind of when, as coaches, we're asked to give general information. So that's when most runners' plans mostly are doing the last long run 3 weeks out. And that's usually just the peak of the long run. And then you go down mileage from there. If your training plan or your coach has advised you something differently, please listen to that coach or PT or whoever you're speaking to. But that's just kind of the general information, general guidance from coaches to do the last long run, 3 weeks out. And then you'll kind of still be running, but you had 20 weeks, 20 milers, let's say, and then you might do like a 16 and then like a 7 mile or something like that, whatever your training plan says. But follow that plan. It is your guide to the marathon. Let's jump to the next one. Let's see. Freddie asks, I'm running Chicago and then New York City, the TCS New York City Marathon. I want to know I know there'll be recovery, but what do you recommend? Michelle, maybe you can kind of talk about what to in between 2 major marathons. I think they're about 4 weeks apart this year. My advice, I think from a training perspective, would be focus on one as a goal race. So you're not going to be able to effort both of them. Ideally, probably Chicago. It's first, it's flatter. You've probably been training for that. More likely to get a great time. Though you can do that in New York City, but pick one that's a goal race, and then the other one should be more of a celebration or fun run, or training race for the other one. What is your take?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're spot on with that. I think depending on which one you're going for as like your target, I would say trust the time in between and don't be afraid to take recovery time. Your body has spent months training. Don't be afraid to spend, a week or two after working on your recovery. You can still run during that time, but like you wouldn't be doing long distance running. You'd be doing like recovery stuff, but trust that that's okay. Your body's not going to decondition. Remember that kind of 2 to 3 week rule as far as adaptation. So your body's not going to decondition in that time in between. So I would focus on the recovery. That way you can make it to the second one, still feeling pretty good.
I love that. A lot of runners are doing that right now. As I said, a lot of marathons are pushed this year to the fall. We just had Berlin, London, Chicago, you name it. Everything's happening next few weeks, and Philly's after that as always. So great question. Good luck. I think we have about 2 more left. Let's see. What do we have coming in here? Rob says, is there one point in the course where I should remind myself to look up and around and take it all in? I love this question. Rob, really good question. I think for me, I still remember my first marathon, New York City Marathon in 2010, in the start corrals. I looked up and I still remember seeing one of those helicopters with the big banners after it. And it said, good luck runners or something like that. It was a red plane, I still remember. And I still remember to this day. And I didn't have a goal time. I didn't know what I was doing out there. I was a new runner, first marathon. And I took that moment and I just kind of took a deep breath and I remembered this is just a fun thing. I'm here to enjoy it. But the great thing about the New York City Marathon course is the whole thing is a great view. From the Verrazano Bridge, you're going to see people stopping to take photos on the Verrazano Bridge because you have the great skyline, Statue of Liberty to the left of you. You're going to have some I think they're like police or fire boats on the right side of you, spraying some water, kind of celebrating you. You're going to have helicopters above you. Going through Brooklyn, you're going to see so many diverse neighborhoods as you run through Bay Ridge, Sunset Park, Greenpoint, Williamsburg. Fort Greene is a block party out there. So every aspect of Brooklyn's great. Queens, they come alive. Queensboro Bridge, also, like I said, you need to take that moment in because it's the uniquest part of the course where it is just silent and all you hear is pitter patter. First Avenue, as I said before, it is a wall of sound cheering your name. So everywhere along the course, if this is your first marathon, don't look at your watch, put it aside and take in the sights and sounds and know that, the city came alive for you to be out there that day. Michelle, have you ran the course before? And do you have a place that you'd recommend kind of enjoying the moment?
Yeah, I've run the course before. I love this question. I think this is an amazing question. I think the Queensboro Bridge into First Avenue is such a unique experience because on the bridge, like you said, it is silent. I feel like that's your time to kind of reflect on all the training you've done and all the effort you've put in over the past 3-4 months. And then when you hit First Avenue, it's like everyone is there to congratulate you and push you through. And I feel like that's where you kind of get that second kick of energy to get you through because it's a long race. But I think it's a wonderful experience. But I think everywhere on the course, I've never run a race where there's been so much support from a city. And it's my favorite day of the year in New York. So I think everywhere. But for me, it was coming off that quiet bridge into the rumble of First Avenue. It was an amazing experience. I'll never forget it.
I love it. I keep seeing more questions coming through. I think, we're almost done. And then you guys keep asking more questions. I love it. So we're going to try our best to kind of do these, answer them fully, but also quickly, because I want to make sure we get these in the last 4 minutes here. Next question. Oh, is it the next question? Maybe I missed it. Yes. Siren says, any tips for training locations in New York City in the New York City Marathon week? I'm flying in Tuesday before the race day. I'm thinking Central Park. So Central Park is the epitome of running in the world, New York City. It's where all runners go. It's not flat. It's undulated. There's trails there too. So it's wonderful. Check out West Side Highway. It's straight and flat. It's great. You're right in the water. You also just go to the east side. There's running there. Early in the morning, run across, depending on where you're staying, run across the Brooklyn Bridge. It is a gorgeous view. Just go early because it does get crowded in the middle of the day. You could head into Brooklyn Bridge Park, which is the park right outside Brooklyn Heights. It's gorgeous. You can also take a train home because Brooklyn Heights has so many subways out there. You can head to the Navy Yards in Brooklyn as well. Or you can also run over the Queensboro Bridge if you want a taste of it before the race. You'll be on the sidewalk if you go over that bridge, unlike race day where it'll be on the streets, but you can actually get a feel of what it's like on that bridge. So tons of places. Hopefully that helps you. And good luck on your flight and New York City race. Let's see. Next we have Ravi. Do any local clubs open their doors to runners from out of town to join them on runs during the week. A lot of local clubs actually let runners all the time into their runs. Check out our NYRR.org site, and you can, I think, search for local teams or clubs, type in a search at bar. Maybe on the back end, we can put a link to it. Rob is on the chat right now. Can maybe link to our club pages. So many clubs are free to runners. They welcome you to join them. There are also clubs do put on long runs. Usually the last 10 is a very common run, the last week out from the New York City Marathon. So late October, whatever the last, that October 29th, 28th, or whatever it would be. They do the last 10 of the course. So you start on First Avenue right after you get over the Queensboro Bridge and run into the Bronx and back. And so like a lot of teams do that, a lot of clubs do that. But just kind of search our site, and you can look at some clubs and look in their programs to see what they have coming up. All right, next we have Otto again. Would you recommend doing the Abbott Dash to Finish race a few days for the marathon? Otto, it depends on if you are the type of person that can hold yourself back from running a hard 5K. It is a phenomenal race. The Abbott and NYRR obviously do an amazing job with it. I ran it last year, and it was one of my favorite 5Ks. Started at the UN, head through Times Square. You finished at the marathon finish line, which is really cool. So if you have family and friends coming to town, you can do it together. But as someone who's participating in running the New York City Marathon, you need to hold back in that race and treat it just like a shakeout. So start back in a farther corral and watch your pace that entire race. Think of it as a shakeout run. You're enjoying it. Take your phone with you and take pictures. Enjoy it. Celebrate. Stop with crowds. High five them. Don't treat it as a race. But if you are not racing the marathon and you're in town, it is a fun and fast course that you can also have a really fun time in as an A effort race. And I think we have maybe one more left. And we have 1 minute left. Let's see if we can knock this out. Edna says, is it possible to be recovered from the last 20-mile run if it's only 12 days before the race? Michelle, I want you to kind of take this one, talk about recovery. We talked about, the 14-day, 2-week kind of period it takes to recover from a very long distance, and kind of what your take on this is.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, obviously it's hard to predict, but I would say, you're probably fine. 12 days is not, that out of the question. I would just say it probably depends on how you felt with your other long runs, right? So if you've done like an 18-miler and you felt reasonable, 10, 12 days after, you're probably going to feel the same thing with a 20-mile run. But it's hard to predict, but I would say use your previous recovery status as a way to kind of dictate if you think you'll have that same, response to a 20-mile run. So see how you feel at your next longest run, and I would use that to guide whether you think 12 days is going to get you there or not. But I would guess it probably is without knowing you or your training program.
I love it. Great questions. Runners, thank you so much for all the great questions, the shout outs from across the country and across the world. It was amazing to hear from you. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Good luck to everyone who is running the TCS New York City Marathon, and we will see you out there on the course. And thank you, Michelle, again for joining us today, and everyone at HSS. Thank you guys.
Thanks.